All good? Can you hear me? Good? Yes? No? It's on. Yep. I'll move it up a little bit. There we go. Better? All right. Okay. Who's ready for a 2-hour session today? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the word. Thank you that you put your words inside of my mouth, and the words that come out of my mouth are correct, and for education and learning and for training, Lord. I thank you that whoever is reading the word, that the words unfold underneath their eyes, and that um, the words that are coming out of my mouth, that they hear it, and not just hearing it, but receiving it. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Well, today's Mother's Day, right? And a lot of times when mothers teach about the Bible, they teach about the story of David and Goliath, right? So we're going to talk about the story of David and Goliath and go into more detail about that. So um, what we really have to do is we have to move past really that Sunday school version and get into more in depth inside of it, because there's a lot of good points inside of the story of David and Goliath that maybe somebody or maybe some people don't realize. There's some key little aspects inside of there, that there's prophetic word. There's also things that reveal to you through the word, other things coming in the future, also in the Bible, and also for your own life. And it's not just a story about a boy in a slingshot, but it's also a blueprint for spiritual warfare. If you think about Goliath being an enemy, and then David coming with God and his armies and defeating the enemy. So we're getting down to, and it's going to be, if you want to start turning to that, it's 1 Samuel 17. And this is going to be called the Valley of Victory, Confronting Your Giants. You didn't miss anything. You're good. We just started. So. Also, when we think about the story of David and Goliath, it's also a prophetic word for the works of Jesus, and how we should also live our lives. And also, in addition to this story, if we think about David, Jesus is also a descendant of David, so and also referred to as the son of David. So also it fulfills some prophecies going downstream as well. All right, so let's go to 1 Samuel 17. And what we're going to do is we're going to read a chunk of the chunk of the chapter. And then we're going to go back into the verses and then kind of deconstruct each verse as we go down through. There's a lot of good key points. We're not going to go through every verse, but we're going to hit the key ones that we have through here. All right, so 1 Samuel 17, we're going to read verses 1 through 16. First Samuel. Oh, I'm in 2 Samuel. Let me go to 1 Samuel. Sorry. I wonder why it looks strange. All right. 1 Samuel 17. Now, the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh in Judah. We'll say Socoh. Yeah, Socoh. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim, between Socoh and Azekah. Yeah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out to the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you are not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now, David was the son of Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was old and well advanced in years. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, then the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. All right. And we have those verses there. And I saw that David also came from Bethlehem too. Did you see that part there? All right. All right. In the first part here, in the Bible here, it says that Goliath stood over 9 feet tall. Is he still back there? No? All right. I'm going to grab something quick. Is he there? He's not listening to me? All right. Come on over here and help me out.
I tried leaning over it.
All right. Your job is to take this tape measure and go 9 feet and go up high. See if it can hit the ceiling or... All right. Keep going. Is that 9? All right, hold it up. Oh, okay. He was over 9 feet. In fact, it says he was 9 foot 9 inches. Okay? So imagine if we had somebody that was a Israelite, we'll say they're maybe what, 5, we'll say at the most 5'5", 5'4", usually in that area they're not maybe that tall maybe. Right? We're good.
You're good now?
Yep, thank you. Just for a visual. It's always good to have visuals. All right, so we think about that. 9 foot 9 that he was, all right? He also wore bronze armor weighing 100, the translation is kind of 125 pounds. So think about that. That's like a person that's on somebody. And he was a professional killer. All right, they sent him out there to kill the person, that they had to match up against so that they could defeat them. But his greatest weapon wasn't his spear. Guess what it was? It was psychological, right? He would go out, and he didn't bring just a sword. He brought a spirit of intimidation. Goliath was big, but guess what? He's not God. Okay? So when we go to the size of Goliath, they call it 6 cubits and a span, which is in verse 4. So that's his height, okay? It's roughly 9 foot 9 inches high. And when we look at the number 9 in the Bible, it often signifies divine completeness, represents finality or judgment, and it often represents the end of a matter. Okay, so if it translates to 9 foot 9, there's 2 9s there. All right, we're thinking about this. We're going to deconstruct some of the numbers here when we get through these. The number 9 also appears 49 times in the King James Version, also representing the 9 fruits of the Spirit, 9th hour death of Jesus. There's a couple different places there. All right, so we talk about completeness. 9 fruits of the Spirit. That's a complete divine completeness. All right. We've got those 9 gifts. We have finality and judgment. We've got, well, I said, Christ died at the 9th hour. That's finality. That's judgment. All right. The Day of Atonement, a major day of judgment, also begins on the 9th day of the 7th month. 9. Also, with promises, Abraham was 99 years old when God promised a son. And Sarah was 90 when she received the promise as well. Then also, generational. So the number 9 is also generational. Noah was the 9th generation from Adam. And then also 9 generations from Noah to Abraham. Okay, so that we're going to think about this too when we get into this more. So we think about the number 9 as a prophetic significance for completeness, finality, promises for you and for generations to come. So that's just one point here, okay? Verse 5. We read verse 5. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. Now, when it says he wore a coat of scale armor, in the original Hebrew, that is kasim. Have you known that? Have you known that? Yeah. So it is, I'll write this down here. Let me make sure I'm writing it right. I think I am, yep. Kasim, all right. That word in the original Hebrew refers to snake-like armor. Okay, so when we think about all of these things in the Bible, the enemy is a snake, right? In Genesis, that was the snake that came as a crawling on his belly, a snake, we think it as. Okay, prophetic also in this story. Okay, and that was the original Hebrew text. Now, it also, in that verse, okay, so in that verse, it also details a bronze helmet, a scaled coat of mail, and the weight of the armor at 5,000 shekels. Now, there are some words that are similar to this Hebrew word, and some of those words are Qasam, Qasam, which is a Hebrew verb meaning to practice divination or sorcery. All right, so when what Goliath was wearing, that kind of tends towards that as well, right? He's practicing, the Philistines practiced that. Also, we had Qasas, which is a Hebrew verb meaning to cut off or tear. What did David do to Goliath? Cut off his head, yes, yeah. We also have in Arabic, Kassim, Kasim, which is meaning the one who divides. The one who divides. Okay. Where were they standing? In a valley, right? Yeah. So when we look at this and we look at the different terms and we think about what the story means and how it lines up, we're thinking about Goliath not just being the man that was there, but he was kind of like an ancient type of serpent, right? That to crush the seed of the woman, which was David or the Israelites, or going back to Genesis, we go back to, Adam. We then going through all of that. When we think about that, this is kind of lining up here. Yep. So when we talk about that, That was referring back to Genesis and Genesis 3:15, back to that prophecy. And then it's where God promised the descendant of Eve will crush the serpent's head, overcoming Satan while being struck in the heel, foreshadowing who? The victory of Jesus Christ on the cross, right? So that's where that comes back to too. All right. So it's starting to tie together here. And you might not have thought of this from just this story. All right, in verses 8 through 10. So when we look at verse 8, we're going to Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel. This is the strategy of the enemy. He likes to talk loud, right? He likes to, tell you things, maybe keep telling you things over and over again. Philistines were on one side, the Israelites are on another side. The valley was in between. Goliath came out, and for 40 days he stood and shouted at them. Okay, so what do you think the enemy's first goal is? It's to change your self-perception. So it's if he can make you feel small by telling you things or make you feel differently than what God's word is, then he doesn't really have to, you don't have to, the fight's already lost for you, okay? So at that point, he's already won. So we're going to go down to verse 16 at the very bottom of that, where we went down to, all right? Oh, and with that self-perception too, also in Numbers 13, there was a story where they went out and they were going to spy on the country to see if they could take them over, and they came back and they said, "We seem like grasshoppers," because they thought of themselves as small. They thought that they couldn't have that victory. Okay, so another thing, like you have to have that confidence and that faith in the Lord and know the word and the victory that you already have. All right, so verse 16. All righty. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Goliath stepped out. All right, when we talk about the number 40, you might already know some different message or different stories in the Bible, different places in the Bible when we talk about 40. Sometimes it represents a time of testing. All right, the enemy wants to wear you down sometimes through his repetition of hitting you with his words only. Okay, that's all he has, is just to talk to you and get you to think differently. It's up here. If he can make his shout the loudest thing in your life, he wins without ever swinging that sword he wins already. He's got that victory already. Now we talk about 40. We've got Noah's flood. All right. We got Moses. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days. Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days. There's a bunch of different places about 40. So in Genesis 7:16, you don't have to turn there. If you wanted to, just write it down. It's a couple different places where I'm just going to go through a couple different places where it says about 40. Genesis 7:16 says, "The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth." Now, if I was on a boat for 40 days, I knew I was the only person left. You think the human side of me would think that's a test? Maybe. I don't know. But Noah had faith in God, and he knew that he was going to get him through that. He already had the victory about that. He knew the end goal. He trusted in God. Moses also spent 40 days and 40 nights in Mount Sinai with the Lord without eating or drinking. But he received the 10 Commandments. It was time spent receiving the law, covenant renewal, and receiving instructions. Moses had an end goal, a purpose. And that's in Exodus 34:28. In Matthew 4:1, this is about Jesus being led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Matthew 4:1, then Jesus was led in the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The enemy can only talk. He can only make his shout towards Jesus. But Jesus had complete victory through it all. Okay. Those are the numbers for 40. Those are just a few I picked out. Now, when we talked about in the verses here, we go and it was in where it talks about, yes, in verse 2, where it talks about they went to the valley of Elah. Now, the Elah actually means the valley of the terebinth, which is oak. Okay, oak tree. And in the Bible, or usually when we talk about trees, an oak tree is very, very strong. It means, and it symbolizes strength. It was a place that they named for strength and deep roots, yet the Israelites were shaking in their boots when Goliath came out. All right. But we knew somebody who wasn't shaking, right? We knew how the story ends. So with this, really, has there been something that's been shouting at you currently? Is there something that's speaking to you from the world and not the word? Okay. We must realize that the words from the enemy do not dictate the power of God. Victory in Jesus and the final outcome. All right, we're going to continue with the story of David. We're going to go to verse 17. All right. We're going to read to verse 30. Now Jesse said to his son David, take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of the unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left the flock with the shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and greeted his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. Now, the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his father's family from taxes in Israel. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. We're going to read the verse 30. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now what have I done, said David. Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. All right. Now, let's go back to verse 28. In 28, it was Eliab, David's oldest brother, that first said to him, and he criticized him, right? David wasn't supposed to be on the front lines. He was just a delivery boy bringing cheese and bread to his brothers. But when David started asking questions about the giant, his oldest brother, Eliab, attacked him. He said, I know the presumption and the evil of your heart. So, sort of like saying, hey, and it even says, I know how conceited you are. Eliab was angry because David's courage exposed his own cowardice. Is there somewhere it could remind you of someone also that in your own family, when we think about this, that could shred unfaithfulness, could put doubt in your life, it could put strife in your life, it could even come from your own family. In Micah 7:6, it says, it also talks about the own family. For a son dishonors his father, a daughter rises up against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are as members of his own household. So there is also points in the Bible where it talks about that. Okay. Also, when we talk about this area here, I'm going to also talk about King Saul, who he was going to. King Saul was the king there that had the armies there. King Saul was actually taller than everybody else in Israel, so he was the tallest of them all there. He was actually it says he was a head taller than everyone else. And by all accounts, he should have been, because he was the biggest one, been the one out in the valley. But Saul was looking at his own stature instead of a God's stature. Saul and his men weren't just physically outmatched, they were spiritually oppressed. Okay? When we get into some of the verses about spirit, about using the Spirit, 2 Timothy 1:7, what does that say? For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. Also, for about fear, Proverbs 29:25 says, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. So when we talk about this we can call it the Saul spirit of fear, Saul syndrome, whatever you want to call it. His army was snared already. They were looking at the giant instead of the throne. Okay. So in verse 26, when we go to verse 26, David arrived. He didn't see didn't see Goliath as a warrior. He saw a covenant breaker. Okay, so we're going to talk about this. Verse 26, David asks, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" It's not about hygiene or anything like that. It's actually a legal argument. Circumcision was the sign of the covenant between God and Abraham. Okay. He yelled out to him and said, "You're a covenant breaker." Who is that covenant breaker that's out there? He knew already. David was saying, this giant has no legal standing being there. He has no contract with Jehovah. David had a blood covenant that said, The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before your face. Deuteronomy 28:7. Let's go to Deuteronomy 28:7. Hold your place in 1 Samuel 17. Let's actually go there. I'd like everybody to see that one. Everybody there? Okay, 28:7. The Lord will grant that the enemies who rise up against you will be defeated before you. They will come at you from one direction, but flee from you in seven. Okay, good one. While the soldiers were looking at, while the Israelite soldiers were looking at Goliath's spear, David was looking at Goliath's lack of a relationship with God, the covenant breaker. He had no covenant. When you are in the covenant with the Almighty, with the Lord, the size of opposition becomes irrelevant compared to the size of the protector, the victorious one. David turned to his covenant with God, his faith over fear. He knew. Later in life, David also wrote in Psalm 27:1, and you can write that down. I'll just say it here. 27:1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is my stronghold and my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Okay. So if you didn't know, David wrote all the Psalms, but he also talked, his relationship with God. David was also called a man after God's own heart. Okay. David had this relationship. He knew from the very beginning, even as a little boy, even as a teen, when he went and went up against Goliath. Even before that, when he was fighting the lion and the bear, right? Before that, he knew already. David knew that if God is for us, then who can be against us? Okay, and that is Romans 8:31. So if you want to write that down, Romans 8:31. And it says, what then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, then who can be against us? All right, so when we think about this and we think about where David came from, we think about, okay, Saul had all of these troops, all of this whole army there. It could have even been Saul that went out there, right? They were all qualified. David came from somewhere that was unqualified, right? They think he was unqualified, but yet God doesn't always call the people who are qualified. Yes, exactly. Don't let critics talk you out of your divine purpose. Don't let the enemy talk you out of your divine purpose. All right, let's move along in 1 Samuel 17. Now there comes a turning point here. Okay, let's read 31 through 37. When what David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been a fighting man from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." There's a turning point. Now, in verse 33, where Saul finally listened to David, he tells him, "But you're only a young man." Now, we think that David was probably between like 13 and 19 years old at this point, because you had to be at least 20 years old and older to serve in the army. So he couldn't go and serve in the army, because I'm sure if he was 20, he'd want to go and do that at that point. So he was before that. And also, and that's proved by Numbers 1:3, and it says, "You are and Aaron are to count according to the divisions all the men in Israel who are 20 years old or more and able to serve in the army." So, and then many scholars believe that David was like between ages of 13 and 15 at that point. So think about this: a 13 and 15-year-old kid, okay, going and fighting this 9'9" giant. That's probably, not just tall and skinny, but he's probably pretty hefty and pretty big, and probably weighs about maybe 10 times as much as him. All right. And he had to be at least over 13, because that's in Jewish custom to be over 13 is the age of accountability, and many scholars believe that it was after that too. But I like to think that David was like probably 15. Let's say 15, right? Okay. In the Bible, the number 15 often symbolizes rest or deliverance. Okay. And that rest or deliverance usually is following a period of trial or bondage. And it would be probably really nice if he was 15, it'll line up everything with I'm doing here. I like to think that. Usually the 15th day of the month is used for festivals, for celebration. It's one for 15. On the 15th day of Nisan, I think that's how you say it, Nisan, Israel departed Egypt, going from slavery to freedom. 15th day. 15th day of the 7th month is the Feast of the Tabernacles, which meant celebration and rest. So if David was 15, what do you think is going to be coming? Right? Prophetic. Also, 15 is the product of the number 3 and the number 5. The number 3 meaning divine perfection, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay. Number 5, it's mentioned hundreds of times. It's associated with grace, God's provision, God's covenant side of the Bible. Not to mention the 5 stones that David selected that we're going to talk about later. 3 times 5, 15. Good. Okay. And I was actually going through and I was like, oh, maybe when David started writing this, it actually was all these things lining up, and maybe it was like Psalm 3 and then Psalm 5 and then Psalm 15. And it does talk about some deliverance and keeping me safe and things like that. So just think about that when you go through things. And even when you're going through the Bible, sometimes numbers do mean something to the Lord. Yep. And so, like I said, why wouldn't he be 15? It just makes sense. And, and it's another wonderful alignment here of what I'm talking about. So David's response to Goliath, and when he said this to Saul and to everyone there, was that turning point of this entire story. He was the one who stepped out and knew his victory, and he spoke it, and he made the action on it. So when we go to verse 34 and 35, if we read that again, he recounts the history that he had about the lion or the bear. Okay, we'll read 34 and 35 again. But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it." He had history there. He knew that God was going to protect him and lead him to victory. Verse 36 and 37. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defiled the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. He's speaking it right there again. He already knew he has the victory, and he was speaking it right there. He'll deliver him. And what did God say, or what did Saul say after David said that? Right at the end of 37. Go and the Lord be with you. Yeah. Saul had no clue what to do and everything like that, but guess what? David came in and showed the victory and spoke that out and started to change now the minds of everybody else that are around him there. David knew that God would be faithful to him, protect him, and give him the victory before the fight even began. So what's the power of your testimony? David didn't rely on a prophecy. He relied on history as well. Faith is built by looking backward into God's faithfulness so you can look forward into your current mountain or your current Goliath or enemy that's coming up against you. Okay? Now, let's continue on here. All right? Going good so far? Everybody like it? Yeah? Yeah? All right. Excellent. Like to get some feedback. Okay, 1 Samuel 17:38. And we're going to read 38 to 40. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Verse 38, we see there, Saul tried to put his armor on David. That's a crucial moment as well. David tried to walk around, but he couldn't. Okay? He tried to dress David in his own armor. And guess what? That was a fleshly solution to a spiritual problem. The world will try to give you proven methods, we'll put them in quotes, right? Proven methods to solve your problems. Do it this way, they say, or use this kind of method or this kind of plan. But if it doesn't fit the Spirit of God, Spirit of the Most High, it's only going to weigh you down. So Saul's armor represented the old way of doing things, tradition, human strength, and outer optics. Verse 39, it said, David tried and it said, I cannot go in these because I am not used to them or haven't tested them. Does everybody know 2 Corinthians 10:4? Let's go there. Hold your place here. Everybody there? Okay. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Okay. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. So this was written after David, but he knew this already back in his time. All right. Let's move on to verse 40. 1740. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with a sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Now, verse 40 says he went to the stream, the brook. Usually, what does a brook or a stream represent, or water represent? Also, usually water represents word, spirit, okay, refreshment, relaxation. It also means a rejuvenation or a, what kind of word? I'm adding more to that, but yeah, you get the idea. All right, representing word and spirit, we'll say. Smooth stones. He chose 5 smooth stones. Why 5? Anybody think, why did he choose 5? Do you think he's going to miss? No? Okay. All right. Well, some scholars say also, or in the Bible, some say Goliath had 4 more brothers or 4 other relatives. Okay. Have you heard any different about 5 stones? No? Okay. All right. Based on biblical accounts in 2 Samuel 21 and 1 Chronicles 20, Goliath had 4 brothers, or at least 4 other giant relatives, often identified as brothers. And those giants were also killed by David and his men as well. Those 4 giants, often called the sons of the giant in Gath, are listed as I won't say the names, but you can read those for yourself if you want to know the verses, or if you wrote them down, you can read them. And they had 6 fingers and 6 toes. I'm not going to go into any numbers about 6 or whatever. Well, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6. Okay, all right, giants there. David knew that he would have to deal also with his brothers, with his other family. So he took 5. He knew he was going to get Goliath to the 1, and then he was going to go grab them too, right? He understood to achieve full victory, he must get rid of all of the giants in the land. All of it. David wasn't just planning to win a battle, he was ready to take out the whole family tree. Now we know why 5, right? We think, just grab 5. Oh, these 5 look nice, I'll grab those. But he knew that the first one was going to hit the Goliath in the first place, so why take the other? Well, didn't make sense. I guess you never realized and looked into that, right? Never thought, why? Yeah. Why smooth stones? Well, smooth stones fly straight to the mark, and they go where you desire. Accuracy. They have an intended purpose. I'm not going to just go out there and get any old stone, right? I'm grabbing smooth stones. If I know I'm going to use a slingshot or sling, I'm grabbing smooth because it's an intended purpose of where it's going to go. It's going to fly straight, accurate. It fulfills a goal which is set. Isaiah 55:11. So shall my word that goes forth from my mouth, it shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish what I please. Stones are representing the word coming from his mouth. he talked to Saul. He said, "Hey, I'm going to go get this giant." Word. It was an intended word for that, right? Stones intended for that. It's going to accomplish something. A stone in David's hand plus God's breath equals the ballistic missile, right? Yes. The stones were probably pretty small too, right? Right. So, also things in your life that you might think are small, they're powerful. Okay. We also know that David had a sling, right? We might think of a slingshot nowadays where you pull it back and you shoot it. No, this is it's a long rope with a little like pouch on the end of it, and there's another long rope on it, and they put the stone in the pouch, and then they take the two ends and they kind of whip it around real fast. And then they let go of the one end and the stone flies out. In the Bible, that sling signifies the triumph of faith and divine power over human strength. And that was perfectly illustrated by David's victory over Goliath. Now, it represents how God uses also humble, ordinary, or weak tools, or tools that you might not think that are powerful. Who would think, oh yeah, I have a stone and I've got this rope, and thinking worldly, natural, oh, that's not going to hurt me or not going to do anything to me. It's just a rope and some rocks, right? Well, powerful. And it wasn't the physical, but he knew that he had divine providence. Now, in the Bible, this is also considered like an unexpected weapon. We might think of it as an unexpected weapon. In the Bible, the sling was usually a common low-cost tool for armies because it was just rocks and a little piece of rope. All right. And when we think about the contrast between that tool, all right, that weapon, compared to what Goliath had, what did Goliath had? Armor, sword, helmet. Probably looked really nice, right? Really, really beautiful in the worldly sense, and yeah, probably filled with gold. And imagine if it looked like snake scales and everything. Probably was pretty nice. Yeah. So going up from a low cost tool, a really basic tool, to that kind of armor, and that kind of proved that faith was overcoming the worldly aspects, the view of what you'd see in the world. You might think it's unsurmountable. You might think it's impossible to defeat somebody like that, but David knew. Also, the sling also could represent spiritual discipline and preparation. Now, a sling requires precision to use. You can't just have any old person get up there and wing it around and throw it, right? You got to be skilled with it. Okay, so we have to also be skilled in knowing the word as well. Okay, you can't just let it go and pick it up every once in a while and then try to go out there and think you have the victory. But you know what? You got to be in the word. Be in there. Use it. Become skilled at it. Become skilled in what you're speaking as well. All right. So with that as well, David was skilled with how he used it before, but not only was he equipped with the sling and the stones, but he was equipped with also a skill set from God. Now, in Psalm 18:34, another verse that David wrote. He was used to, and I believe that Psalm was kind of like a his history with God that he was writing down, things that God's done for him and things that he's helped him with, and also praising the Lord and thanking him for things as well. And Psalm 18:34 says, "He trains my hands for battle. My arms can bend a bow of bronze." He trains my hands for battle. So he knew that God was helping him, also training him up for things, for battle. Okay. Should we continue on? All right, let's continue on. Let's go back to the story of David back in 1 Samuel 17. We're going to start at 41, where we left off. And we're going to read to verse 50. "Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, 'Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?' And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. 'Come here,' he said, 'and I'll give you your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field.' David said to the Philistine, 'You come against me with the sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands.' As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him." Remember that, quickly towards it. "Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine and killed him." When we read that, it said the giant Goliath looked at David and despised him. He cursed David by his gods. His gods. He was trying to invoke a spiritual atmosphere of defeat. Note this. This was not a military battle. It was a clash of spiritual kingdoms. Okay? Goliath was using his gods. David had the Almighty God. In verse 45, David responded to him, "You come against me with the sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." Now the word Lord Almighty, or Lord of Hosts, they also say, is Jehovah Sabaoth, right? Is that how you say it? Sabaoth? Sabaoth? Yeah, both. However that is, I'll write it down. Jehovah. And there it is. Sabaoth. All right. Now, when David said, "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty," Lord Almighty means this. Okay? What does this mean? That means commander of the armies of heaven. It combines Jehovah, the personal name of God, right? And with Sabaoth, the Hebrew word for armies or multitudes. So David was speaking right there. I'm coming to you with the army of heaven. Now, when we were reading the story as a kid, we don't think of this stuff, do we? We don't we don't think about all these little details that are within this story. Jehovah Sabaoth also appears like 270 times in the Old Testament. So it's a lot of times that they're using God to defeat enemies. So what's the significance of this? It portrays God as a warrior and defender who brings protection to his people. It's used heavily by prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, also to showcase God's sovereignty, especially during times of conflict. And guess what? It doesn't just imply battles. You would think it implies, but it also is for comfort, security. And it represents God as that refuge. When you think about, hey, I've got an army behind me, what is it? That's security. That's comfort. I have an army protecting me. That's refuge. David wasn't just saying about this. Well, David said, really, when he said this about coming in the name of the Lord Almighty, he said, I'm not just a shepherd boy, but I come with 10,000 angels at my side, behind me, coming at you, all right? Spiritual warfare. All right, verse 46. When we get to verse 46. So do you think David just stood there and didn't say a word? No, of course not. He said, this day the Lord will hand you over to me and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. All right? And he also said, today I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. He didn't stand there. He actually prophesied over it. It was speaking things that were in the future to come right there. Okay. He told the giant exactly what was going to happen. At the end of verse 46 also says that all the world may know that there is a God in Israel. Guess what? Deliverance isn't just for you. It's also God's advertisement, right? Your victory is a billboard for that expansion of the kingdom. So he was speaking also that the world may know that there's a God in heaven. So when he defeats Goliath, everybody's going to know that who's the king, who's the true God, right? Everyone. All right, verse 48. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Well, who would do that? I mean, if you saw the giant coming towards you and you're like, oh no, I'm maybe, and he was 9'9" and I'm this little guy, and am I going to go quickly running up to him real quick? Maybe, if I knew exactly who I was, but normally people probably wouldn't do that. Nope. David ran quickly toward the battle line. Guess what? Most people tiptoe around their problems. They don't hit it right where the source is at, right? They don't quickly get to it. They let it go and stagnate. David did not walk even. What did he do? He ran. Yes. Faith does not hesitate. David charged at it full force and he delivered the blow. If you have the faith, it does not hesitate. Don't tiptoe around. Don't let it things be in your life that should not be there. James 2:14. What does that say? Anybody know? Let's go there. James 2:14. Keep your finger here. We're going to come back. All right. James 2:14. What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Well, you know what? Sometimes they say faith without works is dead. David actually acted on his faith. He went out and defeated that enemy. All right. True faith is active and gains results. I could have all the faith that I have, but if I don't speak it, then guess what? Yeah. Also, when we read this, David isn't just a brave kid going after Goliath. He was a king in waiting. Okay? God knew that he was a king in waiting. He had already been anointed by Samuel in chapter 16. So back in 16, he was already anointed by Samuel. And when you know you're anointed for a future, you refuse to be buried in the present. It's a good one, all right? When you know you are anointed for a future, you refuse to be buried in the present. He knew his future and nothing would stop him. David knew his testimony. He couldn't fight with somebody else's armor or somebody else's faith. He knew his own. He had his own, all right? Just like that, you must have your own faith, just like David did, all right? Can't use somebody else's to solve your problems or to get through things. All right, verse 49 and 50 in 1 Samuel 17. And we're getting close. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine and killed him. The stone hit one place Goliath thought he was invincible. Where the enemy thinks he's strongest, right? But guess what? That's exactly where God's stone will strike to take the enemy down. The stone didn't just hit him. It says it sunk into his forehead. Divine acceleration. Struck a place of when we went back to grabbing the stones, it had it flew straight to the mark and goes where it desired. Right? Smooth stones have accuracy. They go faster. And we also said about David's hand, God's breath, ballistic missile, right? Bam. Divine acceleration. right, let's move on. Let's go to verse 51 through 53. So I'll read it first, then we'll go back. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sharaim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. So, verse 51. So, David didn't just knock the giant down. He took the giant's own sword and cut off his head. He had to destroy the thing that was trying to kill him. He didn't want to just manage the giant. He wanted to eliminate it. There was total defeat of the enemy. When they saw that head was cut off, it was a public spectacle. Just as David made that public spectacle over cutting off the head of Goliath, Colossians 2:15, it says, Jesus disarmed the powers and authorities, making a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Prophetic here. Cutting the head off, making a public spectacle. Jesus did the same thing, all right, to the enemy. And that was Colossians 2:15, if you didn't write that down, all right? Another verse, Luke 10:19. You don't have to turn there. I can just read it off here. Says, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. What was Goliath wearing? Yeah. Oh. Ooh. All right. Also in the end of verse 51, there at that second part, it says, when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. When you start defeating the giants in your life, the enemy's going to start turning and running, right? Yeah. Loses his footing and starts to run. Verse 52. Let's see. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout, their own shout, not the shout of the enemy that was weak, right? Now it's their own shout from what they knew that they had victory now, and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sharaim road to Gath and Ekron. When that giant fell, the entire army of Israel rose up and chased the Philistines. So now it just wasn't David, but it was the entire army now that knew their victory. Your one act of faith also can break the spirit of fear off of other people as well. Going back to, it's not just affecting you now anymore, it's affecting everyone around you. Just think of that. David goes out, kills the giant. As soon as he cuts off his head, everybody's like, whoa. The whole army gets up and says, well, if he can do that, then guess what? We're going. And then chase them down. And then eventually in verse 53, what does it say they did? Let's read that. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. Whew. Yeah. Do you think they had some gold there and some food and all sorts of good stuff? Do you think that benefited generations to come as well? Yeah. Not only benefited them there at that point, but also benefited their own generations after them. Did you know David was king for 40 years? There's that 40 number again coming up, huh? Oh. 40 days, Goliath shouted. David turned that around and made it a 40-year kingship. And then after that, David's son Solomon was king, then his son, Solomon's son, and then his son after that. Generational, going down through. They all became kings and benefited as well. All because of the actions of David at that time. And just like when you use these things, your victory will benefit your generations to come as well. Now, with David, there was a decision that he had to make. Was he just going to sit back and be scared as well with everybody else? No. He made the decision to go fight and to speak his victory and know his victory. So we've got that same kind of decision that we have to make as well in our lives. Are you standing in the valley? Is it going to be victory or fear? Yeah. You might have somebody shouting at you. You might have the enemy talking to you. Don't use the earthly armor. It's heavy. It's not going to work. Life is right here in the book. Yep. Victory is right there in the book. Words of the Lord, words of God. So, drop all that worldly armor. Use and fix your life with the Word. Stop trying to fix your life with human and worldly logic. Get into the Word. Go to the brook. Go to the stream. Find scriptures that speak to your situation. Open your mouth up. What did David do? He opened his mouth up and declared his victory. Stop talking about your giant and start talking to your giant. Things like, we declare that the giant of depression is defeated. The giant of lack is defeated. The giant of generational curse is defeated. Next thing, charge the line with confidence. The enemy is already a defeated foe. We should thank the Lord that every giant standing against marriages, the minds, the individuals, is already a defeated foe. Have that confidence. Okay. I'm going to end with this, all right? End with this. Now, it's a declaration. Every force of the enemy, of sickness, of depression, of laziness, of a fear, and of lack of debt has already fallen. You're not living in the valley of defeat. We are not living in the valley of defeat. We have left the valley in victory. The battle was won by Jesus, the true David, who crushed the head of the serpent on the hill of Calvary, and that victory is yours. Okay? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lord, for the message this morning. Thank you that everyone at least got something from it, even if it's one little piece that they understood what I was talking about, and that they have a wonderful Mother's Day coming up, and that they're safe going home, and that they have a blessed week coming along. And thank you, Lord, for it all. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Thanks.